promoting the free exchange of ideas, questioning the status quo, and having some fun along the way. This is the Are We Idiots Show. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show. We are your hosts, as always, Richard Kroll and Mark Weaver.
Good evening, Marcus. It's a little bit of a hazy, rainy day here in the Philadelphia area.
It's the weekly weather report from the Kroller.
I try to keep everyone informed.
All right, so we have, don't forget, listeners, we have our 5-episode challenge out there. I know I've never mentioned that before, but go out and listen to 5 of our episodes. Pick your favorite titles. Go ahead and share it with a friend, too, while you're there, and you'll be hooked for life. You've heard that before.
No, it's the first time, actually.
And while you're there, iTunes ratings, iTunes reviews, share us on Facebook, Twitter. Just do all things social media with the Are We Idiots Show. That is our ask for this week. All right. So here's the agenda. We're going to do the Idiot of the Week Awards. I have some nominees for Kroller here. Then we're going to talk about the minimum wage, and I'm sure Rich is probably scratching his bald head, by the way. Why we're going to be talking about the minimum wage, I will explain. And then we're going to conclude the show keeping the same theme with idiotic jobs, and maybe even unpleasant jobs might be a theme as well.
They're all paying jobs, though.
There we go. All right, so here we go. Without further ado, Idiot of the Week nominee number 1, Rich. And, you know, I never miss an opportunity to bash government. So
you don't. As a libertarian, you do not.
The first nominee, soon-to-be second grader Brendan Mulvaney, ran afoul of government regulators last Friday when vendors at the Saratoga County Fair, this is upstate New York, whined to state health inspector that he had no permit to sell refreshments from his family's front deck just outside the state fairgrounds.
A permit.
Being just a kid, he was also undercutting their pricey drinks by nearly 90%, selling lemonade for just 75 cents. There's a picture of the kid, by the way.
Smart kid.
Cute kid. A significant discount from the $7 cup inside the fair. He also peddled $1 snow cones and bottles of water. The vendors griped to state health inspector doing a routine inspection at the fair, and his next visit was to Mulvaney's home. He promptly ordered the stand shut down, leaving the family shocked. Basically, I could go on, but basically they found out it was a public relations disaster. The next day they said, oh, he doesn't need a permit. And then they realized that they couldn't do it because of health and safety concerns. So then the following day, the third day, they said, yes, he really does need a permit, but we will help expedite the process.
all that for that. Do people have better things to do?
Government is now reaching into little kids' lemonade stands to monitor them.
So picture this. You're in the fair, away from this kid's house. You're in the grounds behind the fences, and you want a lemonade or whatever you want. Are you really going to say, time out, Mommy, let me run back out a half mile outside and go get the kid's 75-cent lemonade? It's ridiculous.
He's just trying to, the people are coming into the fair. He's been doing it for 3 or 4 years, by the way, and now he's shut down. So
is this young entrepreneur a libertarian?
He is industrious. I like that. But anyhow, that was nominee number 1, the Saratoga area state health inspector. Number 2. And I hate to say this, but we usually don't nominate kids for being Idiot of the Week, but a 15-year-old, I think, should be
close enough to adult.
Should be nominated for this. An Indianapolis family is raising a red flag about the so-called hot water challenge. You remember the old ice bucket challenge?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now there's a hot water challenge, evidently. The challenge consists of someone pouring either drinking boiling water through a straw or having the boiling water poured over them.
Third-degree burn exercise.
Last week, Kylan Clark says he and a friend were looking up the challenge on YouTube, and they decided to prank each other. While Kylan was sleeping, his friend poured the water on him as a joke. Quote, And then I looked down at my chest. My skin just fell off my chest. And then I looked in the mirror and had skin falling off here and there on my face. The prank resulted in Kylan suffering secondary burns on his back, chest, and face, and had to stay in the hospital for a week undergoing treatment. Doctors with IU Health says they're starting to see more of these so-called internet challenges land people in the emergency room. Kylan is expected to heal of his injuries eventually. The doctors say his pigment should return in a few months.
Oh, my God.
So, 15-year-old kids in the hot water challenge or the health inspector in Saratoga, New York? What say you?
Quick safety tip, kids. Freezing water can't kill you, or it's cold, it's chilly, a little bit of a shock to the system. Boiling water can actually remove skin and hair and the functionality of limbs. So, gosh, the kid wasn't 5, he was 15.
He's 15. Yeah.
The state fair inspector is more infuriating, but the 15-year-old kid is definitely the idiot of the week.
Okay, so Kylan, he was the victim. I didn't get the name of the kid who poured it over him, but they were both decided to prank each other. So we'll give it to Kylan because half his face is falling off and his chest is what's it called? Peeling, I guess. I don't know.
Melting?
Peeling.
It's melting.
Peeling, whatever. So poor Kylan, you get $1.
I'll send 50 cents to each of them.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the minimum wage, and before we go into it, my guess is that not many of our listeners are pretty affluent, I would think, and I would guess maybe none of our listeners the minimum wage actually applies to. So you're probably scratching your head saying, why in the world does Weaver...
bald head.
Why in the world does Weaver want to talk about the minimum wage? Well, as I've mentioned many times on this show, Bernie Sanders is I think, a very dangerous and powerful person. His ideas he calls them democratic socialism, but let's face it, it's socialism. And one of his big themes was always raising the minimum wage. So I brought this up because I think it's going to be an issue not only in the midterm elections this fall. You saw in New York a 28-year-old congresswoman got elected. She calls herself a democratic socialist, by the way. She's talking about raising the minimum wage. And it's a very populist message. And I do believe that whoever the Democratic nominee who runs against Trump in 2020 is also going to use this. So I think it's important for our listeners to understand when people say the minimum wage, most people think at a surface level without much investigation, yeah, that seems reasonable. Yeah. And by the way, the federal minimum wage for the listeners out there is currently $7.25 an hour. In certain cities, it's $10 an hour, $15 an hour in some cases. In Seattle, I think it is. But the federal minimum wage is $7.25. So before we go into any depth, what was your impression when I said, let's talk about the minimum wage? What do you think most people think about the minimum wage?
I think a lot of people were going to go back to bed or turn the show off, but...
Another time?
Yet another time. The zoning laws was the last one. Although I went back, my wife listened to the zoning laws show, and she said it was our best Idiots of the Week and our best closing segment. You did idiotic laws. So
unfortunately, there was zoning in between.
There was an in-between problem.
Well, actually, didn't one of your friends said even you guys could make zoning laws sound interesting or something?
He did say that.
Oh, okay, we got one compliment.
We got
then.
one.
All right, so minimum wage.
On the surface, you're right. It's not going to affect you and me and 99% of who we're appealing to or who's listening to us. However, it will impact potentially our children, grandchildren, and other folks that have high school jobs or college jobs. So I think it is relevant because I even my stepson is subject to a minimum wage or a lower hourly wage at his job and trying to figure out ways how he can make more money or gain more hours. So it is relevant. Do I care about it? Not yet, but until you tell me why, I will start to learn.
Okay, so let's dig into it real quickly. So first of all, just a little background. The minimum wage started in 1938. It was the Fair Labor Standards Act. And by the way, that also covers overtime rules, which we won't really go into.
The FLSA?
Yes. The FLSA. So let's first start with for the listeners, How do jobs get created? That's a quiz for you, Rich. How do jobs get created?
Well,
Or maybe I'm
You-
baiting you a little bit.
start a business that requires employees to fulfill the responsibilities to make the new company successful.
Correct. Business owners, largely, it could be principals or managers of an organization, but people who have an interest in the profitability of the company decide that they need help doing the job at hand or producing the widget or whatever it is. The person that they hire can only be paid a portion of the value that they create. And this is important. If any young people out there are listening, you are only worth to your employer a portion of the value that you create. You should remember that through your whole lifetime. Think of yourself as working for Me Incorporated, yourself incorporated. And you have to provide value to someone. And here's where it ties back to the minimum wage. If government is dictating in many cases, arbitrary minimum wage nationwide, and we'll talk about why that is arbitrary in a second, that there's no way that should dictate who should get a job, okay? And maybe I'm not explaining myself.
You lost me at hello.
So the point is that let's say that, let's explain the arbitrary nature of the minimum wage. So $7.25 an hour, right?
But let me interject for a minute because I think
sure.
I have a quick analogy to help the audience.
Okay.
Because when you said you can't get paid more than a percentage of the overall value or service you're providing, here's a quick example that's going to resonate.
Okay.
You and I are in sales. We get a percentage of the deal we sell. So let's say, it's typically between 4 and 10% of the overall deal. So if we sell a deal for $50,000 to a business, we may only get paid $2,000 or $3,000 commission on that deal, so the company makes their profit and can pay the other employees in the company that help support that product.
Right. Exactly. And so at a very base level, if the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour and you're working at, Joe's Burger Shop, if the owner of Joe's Burger Shop doesn't realize a profit of at least $7.25, and it's quite a bit more than that. It's probably at least 30% on top of that before they would agree to hire. So you'd have to probably provide a profit of $10 or $12 or $15 an hour for them to hire you for $7 an hour. So I just want people to understand, and if there's 100 employees, how does that all come out in the wash? It may be hard, but the bottom line is you should always know your value in the marketplace, and you're always going to get only a portion of that, not the entire value, unless you own your own company, and then you do that. So that's it. Now let's talk about the arbitrary nature of a federal central authority coming up with a number. Well, if you made $50,000 a year, would you be rich?
It depends on your definition of rich.
It also depends on where you're living, right?
Your cost of living.
Right. So if you made $50,000 a year and you lived in remote sections of Idaho or Iowa or Nebraska or North Dakota,
Tibet,
it's more extreme. Bombay, right? You could be well off or rich or
considered wealthy,
maybe considered wealthy, or at a minimum high middle class in some of those places. Conversely, if you're in Silicon Valley or New York City or L.A. or Palm Beach, if you make $50,000, you're a housekeeper probably.
You're homeless.
Yeah. So the point is very similar to if there's a federal minimum wage of $7.25, how does that work across the vast country that we have with varying costs of living?
Yes. Now you got me. Great point. It
Okay.
should be more proportional to the economic metrics of where you live.
Exactly. And by the way, tax policy is the same problem, by the way, because our federal tax rates are at certain income levels where you go up. Right? And I never really understood this. Obama had a saying that if you make over $250,000, you're rich. Well, yeah, if you're in Buffalo, but if you're in New York City, you're not. So my point is that all these decisions should it should be made at a individual level with the company and the employee being able to bargain for the rate that they want. There shouldn't be any government intervention in a labor market. And also that this arbitrary nature of it is not fair because of the varying cost of living. So am I off on my libertarian rocker, or am I making sense?
Well, you're always off your libertarian rocker, but today you're rocking even a little faster. No, it's good stuff. I mean, again, Professor Weaver, Wharton graduate, is educating the popular man, the masses, the people. Okay, now apply this to where you're going, because for now it's more applicable to, again, children and grandchildren. But I'm sure there's a link you're going to take me to that affects the rest of the world here.
So, actually not as much as you might think. I think it affects the rest of the world in that this sounds like a great idea to be able to boost wages. And what the political elites will tell you is, look at this. They'll point to, let's just say the people that have been able to secure a job at the new higher minimum wage, they get a bump. And that's what most people see, right? And this is applicable to some of the things that Trump's doing with tariffs right now, too, by the way. He's saving a few jobs with applying tariffs, but what happens is 90% of the people pay for the tariffs. So I'm going off on an aside, but that's the same thing that happens with the minimum wage. If you're if you're one of the lucky people to get a job that gets their pay raised, that's great. But what happens is, just like I had an example of the burger joint at $7.25 an hour, if the minimum wage went up to $15 an hour, now instead of that employee having to justify, let's call it $14 or $15 an hour to be hired, because again, they don't get the whole amount, they only get a portion of it. Now, if it's $15 minimum wage, he or she would probably have to generate $25 or $30 of profit to be paid $15. So what happens is it constricts supply, and it decreases the amount of people that are hired. And on top of that, and this is the big one, and this is what we can prove by observation, companies begin to look for alternatives to unskilled labor, and that's automation. And that has been happening in droves.
Terminator.
Cyberdyne
systems. Robotics.
Farmers, right? Farmers used to have people pick their crops, and they got too expensive, so they started developing machinery that would pick the crops. Factory workers, right? Used to be guys turning wrenches and whatever, and now they have robots. Banks, you used to have tellers, now they have ATMs. Restaurants, right? A lot of restaurants now are going to kiosks and iPads at the tables.
Drive-through banks.
Robo-advisors coming to the stockbrokers out there. We have a couple stockbroker people. They're having robo-advisors where it's all computer programmed, and they just there's no human involved. We've talked about it on the previous show. Autonomous cars, truck drivers. They're going to be taken out of business by cheaper alternatives. And that's another...
Stepford Wives.
Yes, your favorite movie, which I still have never seen. So my point is that the minimum wage hurts the very people that it's intended to help, the unskilled. And what happens is business owners are always seeking to lower their costs and improve quality and reliability. Robots don't not show up for work. They don't have any problems with their wives or husbands. They don't get sick. They don't complain. And if they can do a cost justification where a robot is cheaper than an employee without all the hassles, well, that's what they do. And that's been going on since the Industrial Revolution.
Didn't some of this lead to unions?
It did. And here's the irony about unions. Unions are promoters of the minimum wage going up as high as possible. But it's for a very insidious reason. It's because they want to increase the cost of labor so that the delta between unskilled and the union people is very small so that the union can justify their existence. So if you see, unions always are fighting for an increase in the minimum wage because it brings it closer to the union wage and it makes it easier for them to justify them because they're getting training and they have the union protections and all that kind of stuff. So
don't let the liberal Democrats who listen to the show hear this.
Okay, who are they, by the way? Do we have any? I think we scared them off by now.
We got a couple blue collar friends that chime in that are union folks. But when you say unskilled, are you saying dumb?
No, of course not. No, I'm just
kidding.
saying.
I'm
just
kidding,
saying. I'm just saying young. I tend to be too serious. You know that.
Folks, Mark's very serious today. I showed up a little late, and he's not his normal jovial self.
I'm trying to fake it. No. So I guess the point is that I have a couple of unintended consequences of the minimum wage that we'll read. But any more comments before we do that?
Yeah, I see this issue, and I didn't really put two and two together, leading to other frivolous and knucklehead lawsuits. I just read this past week that a Starbucks worker in California sued Starbucks, I guess at the state level, because he or she was not getting paid for the 3 to 6 minutes at the close of each shift.
I saw that.
And, for me, I 3 to 6 minutes, a total of 15 to 20 minutes a week, this person was spending outside of clocking the time card.
From the time he clocks out to the time he leaves the premises.
Sued the company for lost wages and actually won that. So now if you got to it can get really, I like your word, insidious, beyond insanity, when government gets involved in wages and what you can sue for and what you're owed and what you're not. I thought it was crazy.
I wonder, when you told me that story, my first reaction is, I wonder if this guy who sued is also counting the smoke breaks, the coffee breaks, the time he goes to the bathroom. Is he deducting that from the time he's working? Probably not. He conveniently forgot that.
Probably
right?
not.
All right, so here's a couple of things that I'll classify as unintended consequences of the minimum wage. We already talked about the arbitrary nature of it because of the different costs of living. Minimum wage, this is something I never thought about. Minimum wage laws require costly taxpayer-funded monitoring and enforcement mechanisms where market wages don't. So if we just let everyone negotiate their own wages between their employer, they don't need a government to go in and monitor whether people are paying the minimum wage. I never thought of that, but that's a great. I don't know how much that costs for the government to monitor. I don't know is it OSHA? Is that what the Occupational Health and Safety Organization? What's the government agency that monitors that? I guess is it OSHA? I don't know. Maybe that's.
I'll go with OSHA.
we need that one. Minimum wage laws discriminate against unskilled workers in favor of skilled workers. We talked about that with the unions, and the greatest amount of discrimination takes place against minority groups. So those of you who are leftists out there that are always fighting for the minorities and the people that get the shaft in our society, well, you shouldn't be fighting for the minimum wage because you're hurting the very people you're trying to help. Minimum wage laws prevent mutually advantageous voluntary labor agreements between employers and employees from taking place. And this is where I wanted to bring in, before we get too long here, how I think overtime is also in this same realm. So if I wanted to work more than 40 hours and I wanted my employer to pay me the normal rate, why is it that the government says I can't do that? Why should I not be free to work and make out a deal with my employer? I think the original intent of the minimum wage was to prevent greedy employers from taking advantage of helpless workers. But that's not the way it is nowadays. In today's society, there's a lot of transparency. There's a lot of information out there. The employees have as much leverage as the employers do. So I don't understand why I can't work more hours without that employer having to pay me time and a half or double time in some cases.
I do not understand as well.
And what happens is, and here's where it comes back around to the libertarian pieces, what happens is employers, when the employee gets to 40 hours, they clock out. They say, you got to clock out. You can't work anymore because they can't afford to pay them time and a half. And what also happens is people, they hire another employee because if they have the hours, they don't want to pay time and a half. They'd rather pay regular time, so they hire another employee. And that further dilutes the labor pool. So this is all another example. We talked about the Federal Reserve. We talked about a lot of things in government where central planning just doesn't work for individual transactions throughout our economy. So that's my libertarian take on the minimum wage. How'd I do?
Dilly dilly. I'm now concerned for my retirement because I was planning on flipping burgers or cleaning up garbage cans, and I don't know how much money I would do that for. $7.50. I might be happy there's a minimum wage. Now, I think the key is here, why is there a minimum wage? Why not just put it out there? I'll hire you. What are you willing to work for? If somebody's willing to work for $5 an hour, God bless them. If they can't get anybody for $7.50 or $10 or $15, it must be a tougher job that deserves higher pay. Supply and demand, basic economics 101.
Right.
Usually if you have a kind of an open market system, it takes care of itself.
And the last thing I'll say is this also hurts young kids. It used to be where a lot of young kids would have very menial jobs, and it would give them their first job experience of, learn to be on time, learn to be punctual, learn to be responsible, get a couple bucks. And if you're 14, 15, 16 years old, and what if you wanted to work and you would be happy working for $5 an hour and it taught you how to work, it gave you a couple extra bucks, but you can't do that? And if you're not providing at least $5 or $6 or $7 an hour in benefit, then people aren't going to hire you. And I think there'd be a lot of people. I would let my son, who's 14, I'd let him work for $5 an hour, but he can't according to the law. And I just think that's ridiculous.
There's a lot of topics that anger my co-host here, Mark Weaver, but it's hard to take him seriously standing on his soapbox when he's wearing an I Want My MTV television T-shirt.
Little retro, I Want My MTV. By the way,
a lot of retro T-shirts.
Little trivia, what was the first video played on MTV? Do you know that?
The very first video. I used to know this. I forget.
Video killed the radio star, which would make sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
And it was by the Buggles.
Or the Bugles.
Buggles? I thought it was the Buggles. Well, Grammy's out there. He'll probably correct me.
I think it's the Bugles.
Bugles, Buggles. I thought it was the Buggles. But anyhow. That's our show. And you mentioned awful jobs and maybe having to do some bad things in retirement, Rich. I think that's a good segue to our final segment. And we're going to talk about, we termed it idiotic jobs. But it could also be bad jobs, and I think you have a list of some of the bad jobs. I actually printed out a couple myself, but
I have 9.
Go for it.
They're all short, so I can just rip through them pretty quick. I went through a list of about 40 called crazy jobs, interesting jobs, can't believe this is a job. I narrowed it down to these 9.
What would be your nightmare job before you start? Just what would be something that you would dread doing every day?
I think the pest control guys that actually go into dark, infested areas, whether it's roaches, spiders, rats, snakes.
It had to be snakes.
Right? And you got to go in, hands and knees, no quick way out. And you may have to crawl under a space or a floor or a basement, and you're in the mix, and they're, all over you. That's got to be bad.
Mine would be anything to do with blood or any kind of medical, incisions, surgeries, or I'm getting chills down the back of my spine just talking about it. I could not do anything where there's cutting and medical and blood and no good for me.
Well, thank God you didn't go to UPenn Medical School then.
All right, lay it on me.
All right. First one, professional human pusher. So, if you've ever seen film clips, and I was there in Japan, everybody, it's amazing, but there's millions and millions of people packed into small areas, and they're all very punctual people. And if you want to get off on a train, It's like a mob scene at a
They
stadium.
push you out of the train or something? Or?
They push you in. So there are guys that are dressed like
Bouncers?
bouncers with hats on, with white gloves. And as you get near the train, 2 or 3 guys push the people so they can get inside the train so the doors close.
My wife would have a panic attack if she was wedged in there like that. I think a
Insane.
lot of people would.
Number 2, professional stand-in liner. So again, in
I think I can handle that.
right, freelancers in Japan will happily wait in, say, a long department store line for you as long as you pay them. In Poland, there was one particular enterprising man named Tadeusz Zak, and he once stood in line for a customer at a hospital. Apparently, there's a lot of long lines for medical care. He waited in line once for 40 hours.
Well, I think people do that when iPhone. Well, the old days, and not anymore, but the old days when iPhones were coming out, people used to camp out 4 or 5 days a week, and they would pay people to wait in line for them here in the United States.
Interesting.
Doesn't seem like that hard a job. I guess
No,
if you have no job, you could camp out there.
Definitely unskilled labor. In Germany, there are garbage detectives. Folks, beware of Germany's garbage police. Their job is to search other people's trash to find items that should have been disposed of differently. Germany is one of the world's toughest laws in this regard. Detectives take their job very seriously. They will ask your neighbors, examine shopping bills, and observe your garbage cans to prove your wrongdoing. Seriously?
Germans are efficient. We got to give them that.
Well, they sure are. In Britain, you can get paid for lying in other people's hotel beds. So this is called a human bed warmer. In 2010, a hotel chain launched a unique offering of human bed warming services. Staffers dress in all-in-one fleece sleeper suits before entering a guest's room to warm his or her bed before the guest's arrival.
I heard also there, instead of prostitutes, now there's cuddlers.
Professional cuddlers.
Professional cuddlers. They don't do anything. They just sit in bed with you and
If
cuddle.
your girlfriend's out of town, you can hire somebody to cuddle with you in bed. Deodorant tester. Now, I saw a photo of this. This is unbelievable. So,
And they have to sniff it or something.
and it was like a line of old ladies with a line of shirtless men ranging in from age and weight and disgustingness, with their right arm up in the air and these ladies' noses right in the pit, checking for malodorous response to different deodorants.
That sounds like my wife's worst nightmare, is having to smell body odor.
That's what you call a stinking job. Car plate blocker. This was one of the more interesting ones I've seen. In a bid to reduce congestion on the roads in Iran, they've employed a strange policy where cars with number plates ending in odd or even numbers are allowed on the roads on alternative days only. Iranians hire men to walk behind their cars so that the cameras don't capture their plate numbers.
Well, I don't know if you probably don't remember, and I barely remember, but in the 70s, when there was a gas rationing, you could only get gas on this, like if you had an odd number tag, you could get gas on a Tuesday, and even numbers were Wednesday. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. It was very
I
weird.
think it was right before we were driving, but
It really sucked when Dad ran out of gas on a lone highway in West Virginia, and it was a Tuesday, and we had to wait till Wednesday to get gas.
these millennials don't have any idea what it was like in the 70s around the
No
United States.
idea.
It was not good.
Couple more for you. There are pet food tasters. So humans that actually taste pet food to make sure there's nothing disgusting. But how the heck do you know what's disgusting to a cat?
It's degrees of disgusting because it's not harmful, though. So I don't think that's that bad. I think I would do that.
Would you do it for minimum wage?
No, I wouldn't do it. No way.
All right. TV corpse. All right. So this sounds a little morbid, but think about when you see medical shows or
Right, yeah,
detective
yeah.
shows, and there's
Yeah.
always that. It's not a mannequin. It's a live person who's acting dead. They earn up to $200 to lay still all day and become part of the credits in a TV show.
But the good thing is they don't have to memorize any lines.
They're also unskilled. The last one I thought was worth noting is you can actually get paid to smoke weed. There are medical marijuana testers.
Snoop Dogg's made a career out of it.
A lot of people have, but they weren't getting paid. You can be a medical marijuana tester. A new job niche is forming with all this
Yeah, I would
legalization
think.
of marijuana, as you like to call it.
Yep.
So they can critique the quality of the products. Testers must be able to legally buy their own medical marijuana and then they get to test it, and they get paid, so that they get to fund their own marijuana habit.
There's a lot of stoners out there that they're applying for that right now. I had a couple of them that I found just before we got here. This was in ancient times. A vomit collector. Collecting the vomit of emperors and nobles guests during large banquets so that they can continue stuffing more food into their bellies, throwing it up, and repeating the cycle through their long feast of gluttony.
You know, there were rooms actually called vomitoriums.
Yeah.
Just think about this. I remember this would have been great for a guy like me who eats too much sometimes. But you have this big feast, you eat 25 pounds of turkey, mashed potatoes, and stuffing, and you say, "Excuse me, Emperor Caesar." You go in, you Ralph in this big vomitorium, and you come back and you do it all over again.
Oh, man. All right, one more. The butt wiper.
What?
Wiping the precious butts of members of royalty after they've used the toilet. That might be the ultimate. Especially after they're a Mexican feast.
If you combine the two, that's how unions got started. The one thing I'll leave you with is this, just dawned on me. So while we were talking about this...
Plague victim burier. I forgot about that one.
Plague victim burier?
Burying a seemingly never-ending amount of plague-infested people who were killed in the Black Death.
It's incredible.
Okay, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, while we were talking, I just saw a job posting for the medical marijuana tester.
Yeah.
The line got so long, it actually created new jobs for the professional stand-in liners.
That's true. See, it's its own ecosystem. It's just creating jobs right and left.
The government doesn't have to get involved. It happens on its own.
All right, folks. Well, we had a great show today, and make sure you tune in next week. And this kind of tags off of a little bit of what Rich was talking about last week. We're going to talk about the declining religious values in Western society. Europe has become a much more secular society in the past several decades, and if you look at statistics, the U.S. is quickly following suit. Just one quick factoid. Pew Research in 2014, almost 23% of Americans do not identify with a religion, and only 7% of that 23% are agnostics or atheists. So the rest of them are not necessarily don't believe in God, but they have no religious affiliation. So that's a growing trend. I would say unfortunately. You would probably say unfortunately. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to delve into a lot of statistics next week and see where that may lead us as a society. So should be quite interesting, that discussion. We talked about doing that a while ago, but should be interesting.
Should be interesting.
As always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See you all next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Are We Idiots Show. Please subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher so you can enjoy all episodes.